Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 24, Logan and Charles. When it was all over, Logan would just be grateful it happened outside. It started simply enough. Logan had been out by the lake again, leaning against a tree, smoking a cigar and winding down from the last few days. John had found him there some time after breakfast and had settled in nearby, sitting at the base of another tree, quietly messing about with his fire. Neither of them bothered with talking. It was one of the things Logan liked about the kid. A lot of folks felt the need to chatter at you because silence felt awkward to them. Logan wasn't one of those people, and he appreciated it when he ran across someone else who was the same way. John had been out there maybe a half hour when Jean came stalking through the trees with the air of a woman on a mission. She stormed right up to John before Logan quite realized what she was up to and started yelling at him at the top of her lungs. "John, you irresponsible idiot! What have we told you? What have we told you? You are not to use your powers anywhere except the danger room, and even then only under strict supervision!" Jane bawled. "How many times have we gone through this? Why can't you just do as you're told for once?" And then she hauled back and slapped John's lighter out of his hand. Logan was moving before the first sentence was completely out of her mouth because John was giving her a deer-in-the-headlights look that he'd never seen on the kid's face before. Logan could literally see the situation going tits up before it actually did, because John, who was normally loud and brash and angry, was unexpectedly plastering himself against the tree behind him, curling in on himself protectively. When Jean slapped at him, all hell broke loose. Because Pyro started to live up to his name. Like a lot of mutants, Pyro was completely immune to his own power. He couldn't burn himself. He used that to good effect, either instinctively or deliberately. Logan wasn't sure which, because his entire body was abruptly wreathed in flames. Jean instantly backpedaled, helped by a vicious shove from Logan. At that, she was lucky. She wasn't a complete stranger or worse, an enemy, so Logan's claws weren't out. But that was as lucky as she got, because she was now in a position that Mystique, Sabretooth, and even Magneto could have told her was a bad position to be in, because Logan was seeing her as a threat. Logan put himself between John and Jean, all his attention on Jean. His head was lowered, body hunched and coiled, hands balled into fists, and wrists at the angle that allowed him to pop his claws. At that moment, he resembled a predator that had spotted wounded prey and was about to pounce. Thankfully, Jean's lizard brain recognized the danger, even if the rest of her didn't, and she froze in place on the ground. There was only one problem. John might be immune to his power, but the tree he'd been leaning against for damn sure wasn't. The thing had gone up in flames more or less instantly, and the fire was spreading fast. Despite having all his attention on Jean, Logan could feel the heat blistering his back and the backs of his legs and threatening to make his clothes combust. Unfortunately, there really wasn't a thing he could do about the situation. Fortunately, the rather visible pillar of flame garnered a lot of attention. Bobby came flying towards them, wide-eyed in alarm, and started flinging ice in a wide ring around the existing conflagration, trying to keep the fire from spreading. Aurora wasn't more than 10 seconds behind him, flying in on the wind as the sky darkened and a deluge started. Rogue, who must have been with Bobby when the fire started, arrived next, with Scott on her heels. For a few moments, there was utter chaos as rain and ice water doused everything, and Scott tried to figure out what was going on. The water apparently shocked John out of whatever flashback he'd been having, or whatever the deal had been there, and he pulled his fire back. With apparent backup arriving, Jean recovered from her temporary bout of sanity, and regarding being very leery of a highly pissed and protective Logan, and decided to open her mouth again. "John was," she started. Logan was having none of "Muzzle your bitch, Scott, before I do it for you," he snapped. Scott was a lot of things, but a complete idiot wasn't one of them. Logan could count the number of times he'd called Scott by his proper name on one hand, with fingers left over. So Scott knew him using his real name now was an indication of how serious the situation was, how close Logan was to smacking Jean unconscious. "Jean, that's enough," Scott said. "Go inside. We'll sort this out with Charles once everyone's calmer." Logan snorted in disgust as she quieted down and stomped off, singed ego and righteous anger almost visible in her wake. Once she was gone, Logan turned to John, who was rather pasty-faced. "You okay, kid?" John swallowed hard. Yeah, I'm fine. And that was bullshit if Logan had ever heard it. John looked like he was about 5 seconds from bolting. Logan gave another snort. Rogue, go pack and head for the truck, he told her, meaning the truck he'd bought to replace the one that got blown up when they'd met. Come on, kid. Last place you need to be right now is here. Rogue and I were planning on heading for Stark's in the morning anyway. Might as well go early. John gave Logan a flat look. They won't want me around, he snapped. No one ever does after this happens. Logan barked a laugh. What part of me telling you this Stark room's with the guy that can become the Hulk if he has a bad day, didn't you hear, John? He wanted to know. Stark won't give a crap, and the others ain't exactly in a position to throw stones. I'm fairly sure they all have body counts higher than yours. To his surprise, John actually flinched. Logan blinked. No wonder the kid had so many problems in general, and here in particular, if he'd killed someone somewhere along the way. Logan wasn't too worried about it, because the kid clearly didn't like that it had happened from the way he'd reacted. Anyway, go pack your stuff and meet Rogue in the garage. We'll head for the city as soon as I'm done with Chuck. John gave a grim nod and headed off, Bobby trotting along behind him, looking concerned. Logan shook his head and headed for Charles' office. Charles maintained a light awareness of everyone in the mansion. He mostly monitored for mood, as a sudden shift was usually a precursor to some sort of trouble. Thus, he was aware of Jean's agitation and anger, but not the cause of it. Given that it was increasing, Charles had begun to focus more of his attention in her direction, wondering what was amiss. Then John's panic, fear, and general distress slammed into him like a tidal wave. It took Charles a few seconds to sort things out, as everyone suddenly reacted to something Charles couldn't see or hear with his own eyes from his office. When he finally won a clear look at the situation, it was from Ororo's eyes. It was not a comforting tableau. Logan was radiating the sort of barely contained violence that he had exhibited in defense of Rogue 6 months prior, and all his attention was locked on Jean. Jean was on her back, propped up on her elbows and staring at Logan and John. John was backed against a tree. The tree and an ever-increasing circle around him enveloped in flames, including himself. Charles couldn't get a sense of what had precipitated the incident, unfortunately, but Logan's focus on Jean and his angry demand to Scott made it clear that she was probably the precipitant. Jean, come to my office. Now, Charles said, backing up Scott's order. It took a few minutes for everyone to arrive. Charles strongly suspected that Logan had delayed long enough to reassure himself as to John's condition before heading to Charles' office. The tension already present in the room racketed up several levels when Logan finally did step in. Even Charles found himself responding atavistically to the threat. A part of his brain insisted that Logan presented, despite Charles knowing better. What happened? Charles asked. Jean immediately opened her mouth to speak, only to snap it shut at a basso growl from Logan. John and I were out by the lake. Logan growled. Kid and I have a deal. He can play with his fire so he don't annoy the hell out of me, clicking his lighter constantly, and I'll trust he knows what he's doing. Logan's accent was coming across stronger thanks to his irritation. We've been doing it that way for months with no problem, and a couple times the kid's been so agitated he could barely see straight. That news was no surprise. Charles had been aware of, pleased by, and completely in favor of the relationship between Logan and John. John had needed badly someone who could reach him and teach him and guide him effectively. Everything was fine until she came barreling out screaming like a banshee. Logan growled, indicating Jean. She slapped the kid's lighter out of his hands and everything went to hell. Given the emotions Charles had picked up off of John, it was possible the boy had a flashback. His life prior to being brought to the mansion certainly provided more than enough fodder for one. Logan focused on Charles. I don't know what her problem is, but you need to put a muzzle and a leash on her before she drives someone right to Magneto. She's been giving Rogue shit from the word go about her powers, about hanging with me, and anything else she could think of. As it is, deal's off. If she's gonna start pushing buttons this hard, I'm gone before I do something we all end up regretting. And Rogue and John are coming with me, because like hell, John needs to be around her right now, and like hell I'm leaving Rogue to her tender mercies. So saying, Logan stormed out. Charles got a brief explanation of what they'd seen once they arrived from the others, then dismissed them and regarded Jean sadly.
Jean, we have spoken about this,
he said quietly, disappointedly. From a certain perspective, Charles really couldn't blame her for being twitchy about uncontrolled mutations. Telepathy was hell on the mutants that had it until they learned some sort of control, and Jean's manifestation of telepathy had been rather more traumatic than most, spurred as it was by the death of her childhood friend. That sort of thing left scars on the psyche. Charles had tried to soothe the trauma and resultant fears, but Jean still had moments. Especially with those children who had especially devastating powers like Rogue and John. And Scott. Scott, though, was sturdy and practical enough to shrug off her moments of panic and in many ways shared her concerns due to the uncontrollable nature of his own mutation and the devastation he'd wreak if he opened his eyes unprotected for even part of a second. Unfortunately, from another perspective, Logan was completely right. Jean's tendency to handle this particular subject badly had the potential to drive a child away and straight into the camp of someone who would encourage them to use their power for less than savory purposes, whether that was Magneto or someone else. Charles had lost Eric to rage and despair. He did not plan to lose anyone else.
I think it is time to begin your sessions again, Jean. This problem is clearly not fixed,
he said. Jean sighed and nodded. Charles didn't mistake it for agreement, merely concession. She would probably never entirely agree that her issues with uncontrolled mutations needed fixing. Logan didn't have very long to wait at all in the garage before both Rogue and John came trotting out, Rogue carrying 2 duffel bags, one his, one hers, John carrying a duffel and a hiker's backpack that had definitely seen better days. Rogue tossed a shirt at him when she got close enough. "Better change. That one's full of holes in the back and is going to draw attention." Logan snorted, but stripped off the shirt he was wearing and pulled on the new one. Once he'd gotten his old one off, he saw what she meant. The thing had mostly been hanging on by dint of sheer willpower, as most of the bag had been burned away thanks to him being so close to the fire. John saw the remains of Logan's shirt and blanched even further than he had been already. "Oh, shit. God, Logan." Logan cut him off. "Shut up, John. You didn't hurt me." Well, not really. Took a bit more than being singed to register as full-on pain in Logan's books. "Throw yourself in the back and get in." John did as he was told and ended up sandwiched between Logan and Rogue. From the look on her face, it was completely deliberate on Rogue's part. Logan didn't really blame her. John had that glassy-eyed look that said he might be headed into shock and reminded him he was safe and keeping him warm, which was a hell of an irony considering the kid's power was a good idea.